Hello, everyone. We're here with Amy from Symantec. She's the CHRO of Symantec. Amy, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have being here. You've got an amazing campus on site here, and as the also head of real estate too, you wear many hats.
That's right. Well, the nice thing is I think there's a real tie between human resources and the facilities, because if it doesn't feel like a place where you can be engaged and collaborative and do your best work, then you're not going to get that engagement. So I love the marriage between where you work and who you work for.
That's pretty incredible, actually. And have you seen that in many other places, or is that
it's becoming much more the norm? In the past, typically facilities reports up through finance because it's a real estate asset management play or procurement. But here, there's a real tie between collaboration and workforce productivity. So it's a nice marriage for the two.
Very nice. And then I know we are here to talk about kind of career and leadership development. So in terms of that, can you maybe walk us through some of your early career moves and how you kind of chose those places?
Absolutely. So, I went to undergrad, and when I got out of school, the economy was just terrible. So I decided I'd go back that following fall to get an advanced degree. And I looked at all the different types of things. I was in the School of Business. So I looked at an MBA. I looked at going and get a master's of maybe even journalism, because I had an undergraduate in that. And I landed on this thing called a Master's of Industrial and Labor Relations, which was in the business school, but it was focused on organizational psychology, business, collective bargaining, because I lived in a state where collective bargaining was really important in West Virginia. Mm-hmm. And so I graduated in 15 months, short order. Actually really loved the programs. It taught me about compensation, org psychology, organizational structure, people practices. And my first job that was hired off of campus was at Frito-Lay. And Frito-Lay and Pepsi were very strong recruiters on our campus. And so I went to work for them in Atlanta, Georgia, and moved from West Virginia. And my first years there, actually my first 7 years out of school, I worked at Frito-Lay, and I moved from Florida or Atlanta to Florida to Texas. And so it was a company where you could move up, but you had to kind of move around to get there. But it was an amazing experience because I learned all about the business. And you would think making chips is not a complex business. It isn't, but there is a science to it. So spent a lot of time working in manufacturing, actually on the floor, working with the sales organizations out in route trucks, working in operations. And I learned so much about how a business works, what the people impacts are related to how the business shifts and changes. I learned how to be change agile myself, because you had to be pretty quick to move and be open to new ideas. And I learned also how to run great processes, how to include leadership in managing change, how to put together programs that employees could embrace to help them do their jobs better.
And also, I think one of the key insights for you, even as you started to find HR as a field you were interested in, right, was in that first job, they had you actually execute a change pretty wholesale within the factory itself.
They did. I think that my first job was a hard one. I was 22, and got my master's, so I think I'm hot stuff. And I go to a manufacturing facility, I'm wearing a hairnet, earplugs, a gasoline shirt that says Amy and Frito-Lay on it.
Not too glamorous.
Not too glamorous by any sense of the words, but what an amazing next sort of education in terms of, one, dealing with an hourly workforce. It was in Atlanta. They were an older population. It was the oldest plant in our operating plants, and predominantly minority, a lot of African Americans that were illiterate, and they had grown up working for 40 years at Frito-Lay, being very successful. But Frito-Lay at the time was changing how they made the chips and the Doritos and the Fritos, and were using a much more scientific approach than just tasting or looking at whether or not there's enough salt or enough oil on the chip. So it required these people who had challenges reading basics to suddenly have to learn how to do statistical process controls and really complex statistics and mathematics. And so one of my first jobs was either try to build the literacy where there was a bridge that could be built, and or two, help those people find other jobs in other parts of the company or outside of the company. And that was very humbling, because suddenly I was across the table from a 57-year-old or 60-year-old male who had never worked at any other company but Frito-Lay, and having to tell him that we no longer had a position for him. So it was an action for me of humility, of really understanding the customer and who I'm supporting and working with, and the experience an employee can have, both good and bad, as they either build new skills or can't scale to the new skill.
And then that really set you off on the direction that HR was something that you really wanted to do too, right?
It was because one, I felt like to be really, really competent at my job and represent the employee and the experience, I had to really understand the business. Because I think sometimes in this role, people say, I'm in it because I love people. Now, of course, I like people, but at the same time, part of this job is sometimes having to deliver tough news, make tough decisions. And if you don't understand the impact this has to the business, then you can't represent the employees as to what may happen to them as a result of these implications. So it was a great marriage between business, understanding how it works, how we make money, who our competitors are, what our products are, and how I take that knowledge and then begin to build an HR strategy to support that business strategy. And those two go so hand in hand.
That's really interesting, because would you say, because I know that in, say, a typical person who's going into HR as a young person, they don't always say learn all the business classes. Would you actually suggest for someone who's interested in that field to also take business classes while they're in college?
Absolutely. I mean, you wouldn't believe how much accounting I know around non-GAAP and GAAP revenue and stock-based comp, because a part of my job is making certain that as we pay employees, both in dollars and in equity, we understand the impact to our P&L and our balance sheet. So when I first joined, it was, wow, how cool is that now I'm in the business. Today, it's table stakes. You have to walk in understanding the business if you truly want to grow and accelerate in the HR field.
Interesting. And then how did you, I know there was different inflection points where you chose, making it from Atlanta to out here in the Silicon Valley. So were there any marked inflection points that you saw in your career as either A, this was a time I needed a change, or B, how did you know where you wanted to go next?
Well, first of all, I was always open to the opportunity. So I think sometimes people, and it's for good reason, want to stay in a particular location because it's safe or there's family or they just don't have a desire to move someplace else. I was open to moving. And so I think as a result of being open to moving, I probably had more opportunities because I wasn't tied to a particular location, nor was I tied to a particular part of the company that I had to go work in. I think my biggest inflection point, which I'd say is a big learning and will always be one that I impart to others, is I had a move coming up to go to Texas with Frito-Lay, and the job sounded great on paper. It was the next promotion. It was what I was aspiring to, but I didn't do my homework about, one, who was I working with? Who was I working for? What was the demographics of the work I'd be doing? And would it be a place that would embrace what I would be at that time was diversity? Mm-hmm. In a geography that wasn't very diverse. And so I took the job, and immediately after taking it, I realized this was probably not the most well-informed decision, but I stuck with it for 18 months because I felt like I had to see this out. One, because I committed to the company, and two, I think you have your best learnings when it's tough. Mm-hmm. And so I walked away much more aware of how to influence a different stakeholder group, much clear about the questions I will ask when I take a job, and very clear about it's not just who you work for, but it's the work that you do that really matters. And so I brought that through me throughout my entire career. And as a result of that, I moved back to Orlando, which I had a penchant for at the time, and worked at Disney for 5 years. So I think it was the next step for me to get me out of Frito to do something very different, which was Disney.
Got it. And then that was, in a sense, really, you really felt you had to stay in that position for a little bit just to make sure that you learned what you needed to learn to be able to go
I did. It's so easy. Sometimes you got to cut bait, and I get that because maybe it's toxic for you or it's not good for you. It wasn't to that extent. I didn't love it, but it felt like it would have been very entitled to say, this didn't work for me, I'm leaving. So I'm someone that kind of sticks things out by virtue of where I've been working the last 5 years, and I'm very perseverant, and I feel like those experiences have told me you can tough it out and you'll be better having gone through it than going around it.
Got it. And one thing I think was actually really interesting too, you mentioned about being willing to change places with Frito-Lay. You moved quite a few times in your early career. And one thing we were talking with the CIO of Intel, she talked about if you aspire to be a leader, you're going to have to take risk, whether that's as an entrepreneur or within the company itself. And so would you kind of say that was kind of your risk taking too, of, hey, I'll try a new place, I'll always volunteer for the new assignment?
Absolutely. And I would go into these cities never having even lived there or known anybody there. So I was like, okay, I'm going to push myself. It's going to help open up my connections, my horizons. And also I took jobs that weren't always the most glamorous or weren't the ones that everybody raised their hand for. So sometimes I would do the jungle gym of going lateral versus vertical, or slightly, perpendicular. And I felt like those were the experiences that grew me more than just the typical, I want to get to the next job. Because sometimes you need a little bit more of that rounding out before you're ready for that next vertical job.
And in some sense, what's kind of ironic, right, is in the beginning of your career, you want to aspire to move up vertically, but then when you get to, say, your position, which is the head leader, they're actually looking for your broad base.
They're looking for breadth. Yeah. I mean, and there's nothing, like if you really want to be a SME, subject matter expert, like you want to be the best executive comp person there is or the best distinguished engineer, very often you will go vertically because you're going super deep mastery. I find in the executive roles, when you're managing organizations or P&Ls or large projects, having a breadth really matters because then you can see the very different triggers and nuances and levers you need to pull that you wouldn't necessarily see if you were going to do a very vertical siloed path.
Very interesting. And then, so you transferring to Disney, yes. That was kind of your opportunity to make it more of a creative,
yes,
right?
I loved it. So Frito taught me all about process, about productivity, about business acumen, around change leadership. Disney was all about how to create vacation memories, but better place to go. And I think you and I talked about days where I had a tough day. My office was in Epcot, so I just pop out, and ride
Small World,
Small World, or GM Test Track. That is, But the good news is I come back and be like, okay, so no one died. This is not a big problem to go solve. We'll go figure it out. But what I loved about Disney is it helped me understand the creative mind. And not to say that creativity doesn't find itself in people who are process oriented, but there's something to be said about working with left brain versus a right brain person. And at Disney, I learned a lot about how to deal with that creative talent, what their expectations were. How do you motivate them? How do you ensure that while we love their creativity, they're also delivering something that we can actually monetize or sell to our customers or experience for them? And so I learned all about negotiations, internal motivations, and also how to influence different cohorts. So I was influencing one cohort at Frito and a different one at Disney. And it really rounded me out in ways I never expected it to.
And then from that perspective, I think it's been interesting in the past, even speaking of Frito, it was very, let's call it tacticals, like go do these things. Do you find that today in the world that there's needed a balance with more of that creative, that adaptive thinking, where you can no longer it's not as simple in a sense where you can just say, go do these things. It has to be a team that can adapt all the time.
I couldn't agree more with you. I've worked with leaders before who bring playbooks with them, and they did it at this company, they do it at this company, they do it at this company, and that doesn't work because what works for one company or what's the best practice in that company may not work for another. So I think the skills that really matter most at any age, I think we're all responsible for this, is to be super agile and aware of what it is you're solving for, because what you used to solve it the last time might not work this time. It doesn't mean what you learned the last time can't be applied, but I think adaptive teams that don't get knocked down too easily by maybe a downturn but can rise above, teams that are fungible, can do lots of different things and not just be tied to one skill, really, really matter right now. And I think that's going to be the way of the generations going forward.
Speaking of that, do you see there's kind of a new movement, let's say within Zappos and stuff like that, where they've seen teams, like you said, as much more fungible? So as opposed to teams staying all together throughout their entire career within it, but they're almost like pieces, and then they can move in between very fluid different teams as needed.
Absolutely. And one thing I see a lot, which I don't know if this next generation will have as much, but I see leaders always following leaders. And I can't tell you how many times we've hired somebody and they bring their team along. And that team's been together for 10 or 15 years. And I get that. It's Charlie's Angels or whatever, the people, the SWAT team, the A team, the people that work together and go from place to place. But I sometimes say you're shorting yourself. One is the leader, because you're responsible for trying to bring in new talent that may have a different perspective versus the talent that looks like you or knows how to knows to act like you. Mm-hmm. And as the person coming to follow that person, are you making your own network? Are you creating your own career path? Or are you only reliant on that person? And then at one point it becomes, well, they only align to them, so we aren't even going to go out and try to attract them because they won't leave without that other person. And I think it does a disservice to you as an individual on your career. And then too, I think the company may be buying people who only have one playbook.
Right. They can't be able to adapt.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. And then from your perspective, for young people, what have you seen be the really critical characteristics to be successful with, say, in a technology firm?
Well, first of all, in technology, nothing's intuitive. So you have to really kind of go in and like wrap your hands into it and roll around in the technology to understand how it works, and also into the business for how it works. So I'd say always be intellectually curious, and be open to new ideas. Be adaptive, because, someone's going to move your cheese many, many times. It happens to me even today. And so you got to be open to say, okay, that wasn't the outcome I had hoped for, or that wasn't the experience I was wanting, or the job I wanted. How can I learn from that and step into it and make it work for me? Thirdly is always be in a state of inquiry. Don't come in knowing all the answers, which you probably don't, nor do I even at my old age, but always be asking the questions and being open to new ideas versus coming in with your own perspective. And last is also advocate for yourself. As in these roles, you can be in these large companies, and the speed of times, your voice can get lost, and you own your career. So nobody owns your career but you. Now, there are companies where there's a joint relationship between the manager and the employee, and that's awesome. Not everyone's that way. So first, begin to own what's important to you, and then build your board of directors, if you say, people that you can trust that can either help you, have a skill that you don't have, can open a door for you, and also be there to pay it back to them. So those would be the big things: agile, adaptive, in state of inquiry, advocating, intellectually curious.
And I'll focus on two of those points. I really like the movie through the cheese metaphor. Are there any things that you have used in your career of how to reflect on, okay, that didn't quite turn out the way I wanted it, and how did you kind of build, okay, this is what I want to, this is how I'll change it for the future?
It's all about this notion of growth mindset, which frankly I was doing way before it was ever.
Carol Dweck.
Yeah, Carol Dweck from Stanford. I love her readings, and also Angela Duckworth about sort of the perseverance piece. But I kind of grew up that way because I grew up in West Virginia in a very good middle class family, but we didn't have a lot, but we were always told to work hard, put your head down, and if things knocked you down, brush yourself off and get back up. So there's constantly times where I am reshifting my mindset. And there are days where it happens like that, and there are weeks where it doesn't happen as quickly. And so what I try to do is say, okay, if it doesn't kill you, it's going to make you stronger. And if it kills you, it's probably okay, metaphorically. But you have to know that things aren't always going to go your way. So what can I learn from it? How long do I have to do this, and how can I get the best out of the time I'm in it? Who can I rely on to either be someone that can coach and counsel me? Mm-hmm. And then, knowing it's not forever, and that nothing, the one thing is constant is change. So if you don't like what just happened, trust me, it'll probably change for something different. Be a part of that change.
So don't be the follower behind that. Always be like a little bit ahead of that.
Yeah, don't let it happen to you. I always kind of lament for people who say, this happened to me, I'm a victim. And we can all take that tack, and there's probably times where it's okay to take that tack, but how do you not wallow in that and use that as, okay, I'm no longer a victim, I'm in control, and what are the steps I'm going to take to regain the feeling that I'm in control and get to that mindset that helped me get through this.
So, one of the things you talked about was being an advocate for yourself. When you look at this generation or you read the news, they're all about that the generation is advocating too much for themselves. So how do you think, and kind of without being, falling into the stereotype of, oh, they're a millennial or Gen Z who is, just trying to, talk about themselves all the time. How do you become an advocate for yourself in your career?
Well, I think the best way to advocate for yourself is to back yourself up with a proven track record. If you're going to ask for something, show that you can do it, or show that you've researched it, or show that you're serious about it and you're not entitled for it. And I think that's a difference between advocacy and entitlement.
Okay.
I think if I'm going to ask for something or demand something or raise my hand for something, I'd like to say I have some knowledge of it, and I would be someone that can show I can do, because I've shown a past track record of being committed or being responsible or being accountable or being someone who's highly collaborative. If you're asking for it for the sake of asking for it, then I think that's when it becomes entitlement.
Got it. Do you remember when you first got into your first, like let's say with Frito-Lay, when you got asked for the first kind of next assignment, do you know anything you remember anything you did there particularly of asking for that, or was just the manager came in and said, here's the different opportunities and you raised your hand for the kind of difficult assignment?
Well, the funny thing is this millennial thing, I'm sorry, I must have been a millennial many years before it was in vogue because I was always asking for what's my next promotion, what's my next opportunity. I remember one as a really good example.
You led the charge.
I led the charge. I was a pioneer even then. But the interesting thing, I remember working at Frito-Lay and I was really getting sort of bored being in that plant. I'd been there for like 2.5, 3 years. And for a 23-year-old, that plant, it was not glamorous. It was tough work, but I felt like I'd done my time there. So ironically enough, I got an offer because I was dipping my toe out in the water, much like you all should be doing from time to time. And I got an offer to go with Exxon Oil. And it was right after many of you probably weren't born at this time, you're going to see this podcast, after the Valdez oil spill, which was a devastating ecological effect. And nobody wanted to work for Exxon. And it was a place where it was more of a pariah. I remember getting the offer, and it was in New Jersey, which is nothing wrong with New Jersey, but I was going from Atlanta to New Jersey, so north versus south, different construct. And I remember considering it seriously because it would have gotten me out of Atlanta. But I felt at the time, which I didn't know, I was running away versus running to. I remember talking to my manager because I was up for promotion. It just wasn't happening fast enough for me, so I went out and found my own promotion at Exxon. And he had a really honest discussion with me, much like I'm having with you all here, about, is this really the right move for you? Are you moving because you want a title? Are you moving because you have this expectation related to gates you've created in your career path that you need to get to the next level? Or are you moving for the right reasons? Is the job interesting? Is the company respectful? Is it a place you'd want to go live? And I couldn't answer any of those questions to the affirmative.
Interesting. So you actually had that almost a powwow with you.
Huge powwow, which I am grateful that they invested that time in me to have that kind of conversation. And they would have blessed my decision either way. But the fact he didn't say, okay, see you later, bye, but really took the time to say, are you making the decision for the right reasons? And that's when I realized I wasn't. Now, I clearly didn't remember that episode, otherwise I wouldn't have gotten to Texas. But I look back and go, it got me much faster, farther ahead here. I remember that time in particular, and I think, as millennials, try and find that sponsorship and mentorship, but earn it with them.
Got it.
Because I think if you find people who want to invest in you and you want to invest in them, it can be a really symbiotic and positive, impact in your life.
And would you suggest both internal and external people?
Yes.
Okay.
My first mentor was a production supervisor, which was several layers ahead of me when I went to Frito-Lay. It was not an HR person. And it was a great mentorship because I learned about the business from his lens. And also he would share with me, like, how's HR showing up? And here's some things that HR should be doing differently or you should be doing differently, Amy. So it was a great relationship. And then as I started to get a broader network, I started reaching out externally. Interestingly, now everyone's reaching out to me. And I really take the time to network back. Talking with you, Brett, is a real joy for me because I want to give back in the way people gave to me when I was your age.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. And I think even now, even in the position you are, because the industry you're in right now, cyber, is absolutely exploding. Yeah. So in terms of that, where do you see the opportunities for young people, sitting from your position, within cyber itself? Well,
huge. So I will say the history of cyber has been, I think, very siloed and very male-oriented because to curate these skills, you should have to be a practitioner for 15, 20 years working in the NSA or in some sort of service or just being in front of a screen looking at intrusions into people's data. What we're finding now is a lot more colleges and campuses are offering cybersecurity as a destination. And oh, by the way, you all are been on devices since you were infants, so you know how these things work. You have real-time insights to security concerns. So I think bringing that capability off of campus into these types of roles and curating it faster, that capability, is definitely where we have to head because we have a gap in capability in this industry. There's a small population of people who do it, who get recruited from company to company. So if I was going to give anybody advice, including my 17-year-old daughter who's on her senior year of high school, think about security and cybersecurity as a future because it's only going to get more complex and it's a huge career opportunity for folks. And because you are some of the end users and deal with these endpoints with your devices, you can actually help influence some of the roadmap of how these things get built from a user interface or from a capability perspective.
And so would you suggest more specific cyber background or you think just bringing in the general machine learning, AI, or
I think
combination?
all of that. I think AI has a lot, and IoT is the big umbrella, but AI capability, machine learning, and cyber are all going to be hand in hand because more companies are using AI and machine learning to run their businesses, which will introduce much more complexity and risk from an enterprise security or consumer security perspective.
That makes sense. And I guess from Symantec itself, for young careers who are looking to kind of enter the market here, what would you say are the opportunities within the organization here? Well,
right now, and this is an interview, and in a point in time, we're going through some big transitions. So we are divesting our big enterprise business, which we sell to large companies and banks, our enterprise business, and we're going to double down on the consumer cybersecurity play, which is all of your devices that you use every day, and you may even bring into work for those who work. And we're going to focus on that. So that's going to be a big opportunity for us, and that's everything from how do we get the digital security footprint for our consumer business? That's our LifeLock in terms of protecting your credit and your data, to protecting your devices, access to devices, making certain that as you grow up and begin to amass some assets, your money's protected. So these things, there's lots of opportunity in our consumer business unit, and it's also a thriving business. It's a younger business, so we'd love to get talent off of campus and early in career because you are the people we are marketing to.
Right. And there's some impact you get to see by doing that, right? Because it's a device you use every day, so all of your friends, the security systems that you build basically protect everyone else.
Really matter, because if you're online or playing a game with a friend and you introduce a virus or something that's going to create problems for the cohort, you're not going to be the most popular guy in the room or lady in the room. So I think there's a lot of opportunity with how you guys behave today that could be brought into the consumer business unit to really help them think about that.
That's great. And then from a diversity perspective, I know that's been a big, consistent support that you've had throughout your whole career. Where does that stand within the organization too?
It's a huge focus for us. So I believe diversity is an outcome of inclusion. And if you have the right kind of environment where people can bring their best selves to work every day, know that what they have to say counts, that they can have contrary opinions and it will be embraced, that in itself will attract people with different perspectives. And if you're truly going to be, for instance, a successful global consumer company, you've got to reflect your consumer base. And so you've got to bring those different thinkings into the world. So we focus a lot on employee resource groups that help us make our products better and recruit the right people into the organization of diverse backgrounds. We focus a lot on some of our commitments related to taking bias out of the system in terms of hiring practices, promotional practices, how we think about describing the jobs we have here to ensure we open a wider net to attract folks. And then we're doing a lot around leadership and helping our leaders think about their role as a servant leader, to be inclusive and not just to hire those that look like you or bring your A-team from the last group, but really kind of invest in the next generation of talent.
That's really interesting. And then any sort of skills or any recommendations you'd have for someone if you had to look back at your own career, I guess either within cyber itself or within the HR field, would there be any recommendations of things that you would recommend for college students to focus on while they're still in school?
Well, the hard thing about in college is some people are really clear about what they want to go do, and others are going to figure it out as they go along. And even those who really know what they want to do will ultimately sometimes pick something different. So what I would be first clear about is do what you love. If you've got passion for what you love, then good things will come your way. If you're doing something because your parents want you to do it or your instructor wants you to do it and you're not digging it, don't do it, because eventually you'll be miserable or you won't see the success you would have if you were in something that you really accelerate in. So I'm telling that to kids, families, parents, friends, because I think sometimes we're guided by those who have raised us, and there's sometimes really good guidance, but sometimes you got to go what's right for you. 2, I would say, is build your network early as a college student, whether it's with your teachers, your guidance counselors, with intern programs. When you go to an internship, get to know as many people as you can, both your peers as well as who you're working for, because they can open up doors for you in the future. Go deep into those relationships. And just third, be open to the possibilities. What you're doing today may not be what you're doing 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. So be open to things that come up in the universe that might be a new career for you that you might not have thought otherwise.
That's very good. Well, Amy, thank you so much for the time today. It's been wonderful.
My pleasure.
And we'll speak to you again.
I look forward to it. Thank you. All right. Take care.